Hello everyone. Today I want to talk to you about some lesser known books that I love. Of course, I love books like Harry Potter and Game of Thrones, just like the rest of us. But what about some books that you may not have heard of that you would like to check into in case you're interested? So the first book I want to talk about today is going to be on the screen somewhere, one way or the other. But it is a book that is called Neverworld Wake by Marisha Pessl, I believe is how you say it. And this book is one of the first young adult books that I read that I was blown away by. I read it about 2 summers ago, I believe it was, and I had no idea what to expect. As you can see by the cover, I wasn't super intrigued because I thought it looked, I don't know about you, but if I saw this cover, I thought it looked like a reality book. I thought it looked like it was going to be sad, maybe, just the color scheme, and the girl there looked kind of dead on the front. And it turns out it's actually kind of a mystery, thriller, and definitely sci-fi novel. So it's a lot different than I expected. Basically, it is set, I think, kind of in the New England area, if I remember correctly, definitely in like a seaside area. And it's about this girl named Beatrice who she recently graduated from high school, like a year ago. And it's been a year since she graduated, and her boyfriend died. He committed suicide, but it's still sort of mysterious, and she thinks that there's a little bit more to it than that. So she goes back a year later to this like seaside area where they were all from, her and all of her friends. And she does get back together with a group of her friends. There's like 5 of them, and they all used to be like the really cool kids in school and like really popular and everything. And they've kind of drifted apart after her boyfriend's death and all that, because he was a member of their group. He was also this like creative genius too, and he wrote songs and stuff, if I recall. Anyway, so while she's there, she gets into a car accident with her friends. And all of a sudden, when they're in this house, this seaside estate that they're visiting, they hear a knock on the door, and it's this mysterious man who says, "Hey, just to let you all know, you're kind of in like this time limbo right now, because apparently you've had a car crash, and now you're sort of in like purgatory, and the world's not real anymore, and you're going to be stuck here until you all decide." I don't know if I even want to tell you what it is, because it's kind of a spoiler, but they have to make this horrible decision. And until they do, they are stuck here indefinitely. And it's kind of like Groundhog Day, because then the day repeats over and over and over, and they're stuck in it endlessly. But what is so cool about it is that they can spend as long as they want to get something right. So like they have to break in somewhere later on in the book, I believe, and they can do it as many times as they want. If the first time they get caught, well, they just do it again. They can just do it again and again and again until they get it perfect. It's a lot about their friendship dynamic as well. The characters aren't really very likable, but that actually kind of makes them likable, honestly. They're, they have a personality, and they're kind of like sassy and stuff, so it's pretty cool. And the biggest part that I liked, besides the time aspect of it, is that it's also a mystery. So her boyfriend that had committed suicide, she knows that there's something going on, there's a little more to it, so she spends this time trying to figure out what happened to him, and the friends kind of wind up helping, and they realize that maybe if they can figure out what happened to him, it might help them a little bit. And there's a couple twists and turns and some shocking things, and the writing was great, and I loved this book so much. Highly, highly recommend it to anyone that likes sci-fi stuff, especially time. It's like time travel kind of thing, like a time loop. And anyway, I think you'll really enjoy it. So I loved it. Definitely 5 stars. Okay, so the next book I want to talk about is a book in a series that you may never have heard of before. So the series is called the Vicki Bliss Mystery Series, and it's by Elizabeth Peters, who is also known for writing a series of Egyptian mysteries, because the author herself is actually an Egyptologist, which that's what I wanted to be when I was, when I was little. So I think that's about the coolest thing ever. And anyway, she was an Egyptologist who wrote these Amelia Peabody mystery series, but she also wrote this series called the Vicki Bliss suspense series, and there's, I believe, 6 of them in the series. This is book 4. You don't have to read them in order, and I remember a long time ago when I first read them that I thought books 1 and 2 weren't even very good. I don't even know why I kept reading, but I'm glad I did, because books 3 and 4 were definitely a lot better. 4 is my favorite. And then 5 was really good. And then like 20 years later, she published book 6. So if you're intrigued by that, definitely check out some of her other books. So these are a mystery series, but this one has a lot more romance in it. And it was actually kind of shocking. It's not really a young adult book or anything, but young adults could read it too. So it's basically about this girl named Vicki Bliss, this woman who lives in Munich, and that's where all these stories take place. And she winds up kind of solving crimes. She's an art historian, that's what it is. But she always gets involved with helping the police with solving crimes and things like that. And in this one, there's this Trojan gold that had vanished that may now have reappeared in a piece of artwork. This true gold from Troy that vanished around, let's see, it was a painting, sorry, the painting, and it painted the gold, and it vanished sometime around World War II, but then she receives this mysterious envelope, and she's got to figure out what's going on. But my favorite part of this is actually the romance aspect. So in the previous books, she runs into a character named John Smith, spelled a little bit differently with the word Smith. She knows that that's not his real name. I think his real first name was really John, but not his last name. And he's basically like this art thief person who replaces famous paintings with fakes so that he can steal the real painting. So he's obviously kind of a bad guy, but she even kind of compares him to like Robin Hood because he only steals from the rich and stuff like that. So he's not like all bad. And obviously his personality is, of course, the best. And so every time she runs into him, they kind of have like a moment. And in this one, it finally all comes to a head. And definitely the romance is kind of the best part of this one. So if that sounds intriguing to you, if you like mysteries and romance and art thieves and stuff like that, then this one's for you. Check out the whole series though, because it is good, but you can read each one individually. You don't have to read the whole series. So Trojan Gold. Okay, so the next book, I'm realizing I have a lot of mysteries on this list, but I think that's okay because I guess I just really like mysteries and just didn't know it because I usually just read fantasy. But anyway, the next book I have is called The City of Dreaming Books by Walter Moores, whatever. Anyway, it was originally written in German and it was translated into English, which is amazing because the wording is so wonderful. I love the word choice and sentence structure and all that. It's wonderful. So the fact that somebody had translated it is pretty amazing. So this book is super weird, but it's a book if you like books, basically. It's a book for book lovers. It is, I would say it's a fantasy / mystery / adventure, I guess. And the main character is a dinosaur, but you kind of don't even need to know that. I mean, like, it doesn't matter. I never think of him as a dinosaur throughout the book, honestly. I just think of him as a person or whatever. But his name is Optimus Yarnspinner, and he lives in this world where books are like, people revere them and authors are just super well respected, and you can only be somebody in this world if you can write this amazing book. So he wants to write like an amazing novel basically to get himself on the map. And at the beginning he has a mentor who has just recently died, his arthurial godfather, I think is what it's called. Yeah. And his arthurial godfather has just died. So his arthurial godfather had this manuscript that he'd been given a long time ago anonymously. He has no idea who wrote it. He just knows that it's the best thing he's ever read and that we need to find the author of this book, of this manuscript. So he sets Optimus kind of on this quest to find this mysterious author. And he has to go to the city of Bookholm to do that, which is this awesome city that has these like catacombs underneath it that are lined with books on the walls. And there's these weird creatures called animatomes or something. Basically, it's like animated books is what they are. Like they're alive. And there are weird creatures in this, but there's also this legend of this Shadow King who supposedly was banished and lives in these catacombs. And the main character kind of gets stuck down there, and there's mysteries, and he's got to try to find a way out, but he's got to figure out what's going on with this Shadow King thing that's supposedly this evil, mysterious force that lives down there and is made of book pages and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, there's all kinds of things. There's betrayal and intrigue and mostly just a lot about books, and the wording is amazing. It's very rich. It kind of reminds me of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. If you've ever read that book, it's kind of like that. So definitely check this one out if you like books. Okay, so my next book on the list is sort of a historical mystery fantasy thingy. It's by Anne Rice, not surprising, and her son Christopher Rice. It's actually the first book that they ever wrote together. I've read one other book by her son before because I thought that it would be good since Anne Rice is wonderful, but it was just sort of there, I suppose you could say. So anyway, this book was the sequel to another book that is just called The Mummy, and The Mummy was published a really long time ago, so the fact that it had a sequel like years and years later was amazing. And I loved the first book, but when I went back and reread it when this one came out, the first book, The Mummy, was it didn't hold up very well. It really wasn't very good. I feel like maybe for teenagers they would like it. It's got romance and things in it, but it just, I don't know, it just wasn't very in depth. It was like, oh, this mummy comes to life and this girl falls in love with him. They are going to run off together, but Cleopatra is a problem as well. Okay, the end. Like, it didn't have much going for it. This has a lot of like rich backstory and all kinds of stuff. So basically, you don't have to have read the first one, but you could read this one by itself if you wanted to. So basically, it's about this girl who lived, what was her name? I already forgot. Julie? Yeah, Julie. Who lives in is it 18 or 1900? Yeah, like Victorian England, basically. And she, in the first book, her dad had just passed away. He died from some mysterious, like, curse or something, of course, in Egypt. And of course, he had just found this mummy. And the mummy winds up coming back to life. And it turns out the reason that the mummy and Cleopatra later can come back to life is because of this mysterious potion. And in the first book, they don't tell you much about it. It's like, oh, by the way, there was an elixir that they drank way back in ancient Egypt that caused them to be able to come back whenever they want. So in this book, they explore that elixir a lot more, and the history of it and the kind of the ramifications of it. And there's a lot of like lore. Like, she creates this whole backstory from thousands of years ago about like another character or two. There's new characters introduced and just this whole like mythology to go along with this elixir and how these characters wound up with it and what it means for them. Cleopatra is still around too. She's still a problem because, you know, she loved Ramses and then he kind of shunned her, and now he's getting married to this other girl. So she's like, oh, I'm going to kill you all and all that sort of stuff. So, and she's also like crazy too. So anyway, if you want to read about basically ancient Egyptians roaming around in Victorian England, and also you like mythology though, and you want to know more about kind of the history of like why they would have this elixir, then this book is super, super good. So Anne Rice for the win again. Okay, we have 2 books left. The next one is more like a novella or a really short novel, I suppose. I think it's considered a novel, but I always thought it was a short story. So it's my favorite Agatha Christie story ever. And I don't really read much Agatha Christie because they're all kind of similar to me, but this one is so different. So this is my copy of it. It's with other stories as well, but it's the one called Death Comes as the End. So it's only like a fifth of this giant book. My book, it's only like 150 pages, but it has like really small font. So anyway, this book is so different than all of her other stories because it is the only book that she has ever written that is not set in the 19th century or 1900s, whichever one it is. Wait, now I have to look. Oh, shoot. I took notes and I already forgot. Yeah, I kind of looked it up on Wikipedia. 20th century. Okay. It's the only one that she's written that is not set in the 20th century. Also, it has no English characters or like European characters, which is also really unusual for her. So Death Comes as the End is set in ancient Egypt. Clearly, I like ancient Egypt, as you can tell from what I've said about some of these other books. Anyway, it is set in ancient Egypt in like 2000 BC or something, and it is a mystery, and it's actually a whodunit. And as I learned by looking it up on Wikipedia, it is the first ever historical whodunit. So there have been whodunits before, and of course historical fiction before, but she combined the two for the first time ever. So it's just a mystery set in ancient Egypt, truly a whodunit. It's about this character named Imhotep, like the mummy on The Mummy, you know. Good. Anyway, Imhotep, who I can only think of now from The Mummy, comes back home from somewhere else, and he brings his concubine, Nofret, I think is her name. Anyway, he thinks, hey, that's a good idea. My family will totally accept my concubine to live with us in our house now. And she dies. What a surprise. Someone murders her. And we all have to figure out who it is. But then other family members start dying, and it's clearly one of his family members or someone that like lives in his house that is the culprit. So you're basically suspicious of everybody, and it's just a true murder mystery, but set in ancient Egypt, and I absolutely loved it. So Death Comes as the End, best Agatha Christie story. Definitely give it a try. And finally, the last book that we're going to talk about today that I absolutely love is something that's really unusual. It is a nonfiction novel. And usually when I see booktubers start talking about nonfiction, I just skip it. But honestly, this one is so cool that you have to listen. Don't just skip this one. So it's called Unweaving the Rainbow by Richard Dawkins. I don't know if you've ever heard of this before. Hopefully not, because that's the point of this video. But it is sort of like a love letter to science. It shows how science is just amazing and nature is just phenomenal. So it's called, the subtitle is Science, Delusion, and the Appetite for Wonder. So the way it's written, he talks about, like, he steals the word unweaving the rainbow from Newton, because Newton said, you know, how can you unweave the rainbow? If you did, you would just reduce it to its colors and it would diminish its beauty, things like that. So he says that that's not the case, that if you look at modern astronomy and things like that, it's like breathtaking poetry, basically. So if you like cosmology, you know, studying the cosmos, that kind of thing. So I just want to read you this one tiny little part of the book because it is really fascinating. He talks about how it's almost too much luck that we could just happen to be right now where we are when we are. And he says, after sleeping through 100 million centuries, we have finally opened our eyes on a sumptuous planet, sparkling with color, bountiful with life. Within decades, we must close our eyes again. Isn't it a noble and enlightened way of spending our brief time in the sun, to work at understanding the universe and how we have come to wake up in it? This is how I answer when I am asked, as I am surprisingly often, why I bother to get up in the mornings. To put it the other way around, isn't it sad to go to your grave without ever wondering why you were born? Who, with such a thought, would not spring from bed, eager to resume discovering the world and rejoicing to be a part of it? So if you've also thought about questions like that and you kind of like existential talk, but also you want to hear more about nature, then this is going to be a good book for you. So anyway, Unweaving the Rainbow, I absolutely love it because I also love science. So great book. So those are some books that I absolutely love that you hopefully have not heard of before, and you might want to give a chance, try them out, see what you think. It's always nice to find kind of a diamond in the rough when you don't expect it. So hopefully this gave you something new that you might go consider, especially if you're in like a reading slump or something maybe. Anyway, all right, thanks guys for watching, and I'll be back soon with another video. Have a good day.